cool. So I got to the so I was still working my way through the essay, and I got to the part on the virtues.
Yeah.
And so there's the 3 cardinal values, and then the 3 corresponding virtues, and one is rationality. And it's talking about 100% focus. Or it says this actually. Rationality is, this is not a direct quote, some of it is just paraphrased, total commitment to a state of full conscious awareness, to the maintenance of full mental focus in all issues, in all choices, in all of one's waking hours. So I'm just trying to, visualize what exactly is. So full focus is obviously, I'm just trying to find references to specific times in my life where I'm in full focus, because, I could be, for example, I'm working on a project and then I feel like checking social media or checking my email, and then I'll read something in that email or on that social media platform, and I'm thinking about it. I'm like thinking a lot, but that's, to me, wouldn't be full focus because I'm not taking into account context. What do you think of that example? I'm just trying to find examples of the difference between being in focus and not being focused.
I think that's a good example. I don't think it's necessarily has to be focused in the sense of like as I described it last time, doesn't necessarily mean being a ninja at all times, being ready to just like attack an intruder any moment, any second, and ready to just go. It's more like what I said, being focused, being ready to direct your attention, being aware of what's happening in your consciousness, paying attention, sort of like being in control of your behavior or being aware of your behavior in a way you feel you can control it, rather than, say, giving in to an impulse to check social media. Because the way you describe that would be kind of like doing it just because you felt like it, not because there's any reason or there's any value in doing so, or even that you cared. It's not like it has to be like a deliberate calculation that you weighed all your options and decided to pay attention or not. It's more like being in a state where you can direct your attention as needed. It doesn't have to mean you're weighing every option every second, because then you'll never be able to make a decision. You always weighing your options, never using actually your consciousness. It'd be like being aware of what your emotions are, being aware of what your thoughts are. And if you're getting, say, for example, if you're getting upset about something, being able to control yourself, say, remove yourself from the situation, or just talk about a new subject, or redirect your mind. That's how I usually think of it, is rationality is being able to apply your thinking as needed, as you want, in an effective way, rather than being, say, a slave to your emotions.
Yep.
I think in the essay Rand would give an example of somebody in a drunken stupor, or maybe that was might have been another essay, actually, where she's saying that like that'd be like not being in focus. She just give an example of like why you would go to a party. I think it was something to do about the psychology of pleasure. It may have been Nathaniel Brandon's essay, and it was talking about how, sure, you can go to a party to celebrate what you've done, an achievement, sharing your values with others, but then there could be in a sense of going to a party just to stop thinking. You're going to drink in order to not be able to think, not be able to acknowledge, or not be able to focus. It's more in contrast to that, where like you're kind of functioning, but you're not like doing things deliberately. And it's more about living a deliberate life rather than going with the flow.
What I took from what you said just before this is a component of focus then is some level of self-awareness. But it would have to be more basic than that, because As in, you don't necessarily need to know the cause of a given emotion. You're just aware that you feel an emotion, right?
Right.
And you're paying attention to it. And then working out the cause is a task itself if you want to pursue it.
Yes.
Um, so on this, topic of deliberateness as being a part of focus, there are a lot of things that I do and people do that aren't necessarily um, they're not they're not that thought out, and they're not thought out in terms of a hierarchy of values. Like there's no conscious knowledge of where this sits in relation to other values. But in that case, okay, so I'll give you an example, make it easier. Like if I'm doing work one day, because I don't need to work every day. I'm sort of like I'm a contractor. Um, sometimes I'll just work, and I'm working because I know work is a thing you need to do, but it's not that reasoned out. So, I mean, that's an example for me. I'm sure everyone else will have their own example of something you might do where it's not, there's no very explicit, clear reasoning as to why you're doing this, how it fits into everything else. So in that case, would you say that's not a state of full focus?
Um, that's really hard to say. It really depends on your consciousness and to what extent are you actually engaging yourself or not engaging yourself. I think only you would know to what extent you really are. I think art, you could maybe have not thought it through, but it doesn't mean it has no value, no point to it. You could acknowledge, oh, maybe I should think about it more. It's not like you've committed some sin that can't be made up for. It's like if you want to live your life in a flourishing way, you ought to be aware. It doesn't. It could just be like a simple awareness and deliberateness. Like, oh yeah, work is important, and I care about this job because it allows me to attain some particular goal, or the work itself is fulfilling, or that it's leading somewhere. Like that kind of awareness. Like it could be awareness in the littlest things in life or the big things. Like you could just be aware of, say, how well you're taking care of your hair when you get up in the morning. Are you taking care of your hygiene, or do you even care enough to like pursue that in a way that matters to you? Um, the way I'm thinking of that is, so yeah, based on what you're saying, I would say that's not in full focus because you made it sound like it was kind of like you were unsure of any meaning behind it. Doesn't mean there isn't. It just means you might need to spend a little bit of time thinking about it. For example, if you want to check the value of your life, it's important to remember the point of um, morality in the Randian sense that is the purpose is for your life. It's not for any like ought apart from yourself. Like we were going over earlier, like it's the choice towards living your life to the fullest, a choice to flourish, a choice to live. And that's the sort of thing you'd want to focus on is your way of thinking about what you do beneficial to your flourishing? You could say, are you obsessing of things that don't matter much? Are you only doing it because you've done it for a few years and you're just used to it? Or there's there some reason for it? Do you enjoy interacting with the people or do you not? I mean, that sort of thing you might want to consider at some point. Or even just how does it make you feel? I mean, do you feel sad? Do you feel happy? Do you feel, I mean, those are the sort of things you can consider, but that's the matter of being in focus, just being able to change course if you need to, or stay the course if that's the right option.
Yeah, those are I guess they're a part of a possibility of being in focus, meaning they're introspective questions that you'd ask yourself.
Yeah.
Where I was going with it, maybe it wasn't clear. Just so going back to that Facebook example, you can kind of set up a frame where, let's say, you're out of focus. So in that moment, you just kind of do whatever. You go to Facebook, you go to some social media
Yeah.
platform, and then you see an article and you're like, wow, this is interesting. Then you go and you read that. Now it's like within that frame of you being out of focus, there's another frame of you reading this article where you're thinking, you're like, what's this article? What's this about?
Right.
And so that's what I'm wondering is like, do you think that, you said no, which I sort of agree with, but because when you think about it, if you enter this frame where you're out of focus and you do something that's out, but then within that frame, you've suddenly, like within that context, we'll say that you're doing something where you're suddenly engaging your thinking. Could you say the person, because I feel like I do that a lot, other people do it a lot too. They're like they've entered some frame, some terms that or context that someone else has set up or they've chosen, they don't know why, but within that they're operating at a high capacity. And so I'm wondering if
Yeah.
that.
That would be a very tough example to reason through. I mean, I do that too sometimes, and it'd be a matter of thinking in the long term. Yes, you can direct your focus very well on an individual thing at a particular time. You would like being in focus would be a matter of recognizing when it's appropriate to change your frame, as you were putting it, to change your context of focus, I would phrase it as. The difficult thing is, of course, how do you frame it still within the context of your life? You can think as like a subframe or as a sub value, like we were just discussing before, like what are values that aren't the ultimate end, that isn't life itself. It's kind of like that. I mean, you could there's probably many ways you can analyze whether it really is worth the time. Um, what I would say about that is more how do you frame it in terms of your psychology? Like, for what reason are you engaging in that? Is it because nothing much interests you and just happens to interest you at that moment? Some people might do it because there's no particular goal they have. So if they have something that grabs their attention, they'll go all in. It's not because there's some greater purpose in their life that they feel, but for a moment they found purpose and then they invested their interest, which in a way you could understand is like, oh, that's what happens when you gain interest in something, when something matters, when there's some purpose behind it. Even if it's very short term and narrow, at least for a moment, that person found like a new end to pursue. But of course, if you're psychologically healthy, then you learn to when to disengage and then it shouldn't become a problem. And it's more like a sort of thing you would not, if it happens, then you can consider like, how do I stop that from happening, that I'm not wasting my time? In the sense that, say, I think that's more an example to talk about Atlas Shrugged, when you could think about, say, the different characters that they have different sort of ends in mind. They could have sub goals, but there's something lacking in their life, maybe a lack of deliberateness or lack of joy sometimes. And in contrast to, say, when people were at the Gulch, of course, it's an idealized setting, but that's people living deliberately. It's not necessarily like you're doing heavy labor all the time. It could be like sometimes you could be doing fishing and like engaging with your life, but at the same time you do very productive things like Wyatt. I think he was doing something with mining or oil in the valley, and he saw value in doing that. It wasn't just as a job. He saw the value of having money in the sense of a productive sense, that it wasn't money for as itself, but money as a symbol of productivity and as goals as a symbol of productivity, and also focus and knowing what he wants. And compared to other people, he'd say, well, he seems to achieve more, live more fully, have a better life, or at least more passionate life when you do these sort of things. what I'm trying to say is that you wouldn't want to think of it as a torturous thing you're trying to do, that you're trying to be a robot at all moments, trying to reason out what the best calculation is at a moment. It's a matter of pursuing these things because it enhances your life.
Yeah,
A greater focus.
I'm with you on that, and but
Right.
I think that like I suppose, being living today where we don't have immediate needs, like there's not an immediate need of food. Food is plentiful, complicates it somewhat because there are all these possible sub goals that you can pursue. I mean, complicates thinking about this. That's what I
Right.
mean. But yeah, I'm in agreement that it's not about being a robot. Like, for example, the person who's reading the Facebook article, he's into that Facebook article. He's not a robot. He's thinking about it and enjoying
Yeah.
it. Um, but there's still that kind of he's gotten there not necessarily that deliberately. It's more just um, like you could also set a frame consciously. Like you could be like, all right, instead of checking Facebook on Sunday, I'll try and make a more realistic example. So, okay, Sunday comes up, you don't have any plans on, you say, I'll do 4 hours of work and then immediately after I'll go surfing or whatever it is you want to do. You've consciously picked that. And then when you're out there, obviously you're
Yes.
enjoying it, you're not calculating, but that's very different from you've done a bit of work and then you've just found yourself on Facebook and you're enjoying this article. Like there's something very different with those two things.
Yeah. I would say that is the case. So, of course, as I'm saying, it's hard to measure these things. A lot of it has to do with understanding your consciousness and understanding when you are engaging or not. I can't just judge out of hand that looking at articles that you find on Facebook is going to be bad. I mean, there's value you can have by being on Facebook and ways to connect. It's a matter of like, do you feel, are you in control of your behavior? Are you doing these things because you kind of want to? Like, it's a state of action where you're comfortable. I think that's more the takeaway point about focus is that you're able to direct your mind as needed. It's starting to get more specific than that without any deeper analysis in psychology, because you'd have to understand about, say, reward mechanisms in the brain that can influence what feels good versus what is good for you, like contrasting the feeling versus the fact of the matter. But you could consider things like that, or knowing that, are you putting things off that might be enjoyable but not stressful? Like you could maybe check out an article on Facebook despite knowing you want to take a walk at the same time to get some exercise. I mean, in other circumstances, it might be fine to walk to read the article, but other circumstances, it might not be fine. Like you're procrastinating as opposed to just engaging in news stories that you like. It's a difficult thing to think of, but that's why you have principles to think about. Like, in general, are you focused? In general, are you pursuing the end of your life or your life as your end? Or in general, are you pursuing flourishing rather than living good enough? That sort of thing.
I agree in terms of there being a need to set context, and so I'm not outright saying checking an article on Facebook is bad,
Right.
but assuming the context is someone who just found themselves on Facebook and then engaged in some article, I would still think that's I'm not sure if in the moment when they're engaged in the article, maybe you could say they're in focus. Anyway, I'm trying to work out the relationship between that to focus. I guess you could say they're in focus, but choices they made previously to end up in that point maybe mean they're not in focus. Like, okay,
Yeah.
if I reflect on a specific example from myself, I do know if I find myself somewhere that I've got in a non-focused way, meaning like, yeah, I've just clicked on something or I'm checking my phone and like, oh, this is interesting. There is something in me maybe that's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? So
Right.
maybe it's not a full state of focus. I
I
don't know.
wouldn't say so.
The reason I'm trying to make these connections is because I feel like, yeah, I can read this and go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Being total commitment to a state of full conscious awareness, to the maintenance of full, you're just going to forget all that. Whereas if I'm like, okay, here's a point in my life where like I'm in full focus, here's not, then you can constantly think
Right.
about it in those terms, in those abstract terms. So yeah, that's what I was going for, really.
Yeah, I think it is important to have a example in your life where you've done that, where you could think of that contrast. Like, I think you're right to point out that um, you could be in a state of focus, but got there to doing that one thing through lack of focus. And you could think of like that feeling of like, oh, why am I doing this? Is probably the perfect example of doing something but not being in focus. Like you're aware of you don't want to be doing it, but not so aware that you're actually directing your consciousness in a different direction. Like that might almost seem contradictory. Like if you're aware that you're not paying attention, it seems like you are, but that wouldn't be a state of focus. You have to be like in control, ready to focus your mind, able to direct yourself and not just wandering around, like getting into a state from a previous state of focus, like just constant, like you could be deliberate about having your like toast and coffee in the morning and take that as a time to just look outside the window and reflect on things and then maybe take a walk outside, then come back and read for an hour and studying. I mean, those would be like a series of focus things. And within each of those, of course, you can leave some room open to direct your attention elsewhere because, of course, new things happen every day. And you could be eating your piece of toast and then you could be reflecting on, say, what kind of meals you want to make because you're into cooking, for example, like you're being focused, or you could just be observing and just practicing focusing your mind. I mean, things like that. I mean, that would be like states of focus, or say you can even set aside free time that you're relatively just seeing where things go rather than always deliberately planning. Like you could imagine somebody could set aside an hour just explore a concept just on Wikipedia. I mean, there's value in that, I think. So it's really a matter of like how you're engaging with your life. And I don't think it's as difficult as people might make it out to be. It's just you had the philosophy behind it is really a motivating factor, but then the strategies are a more specific thing to you about your specific life.
Yeah. And I just add from an observation this morning, like there's also, yeah, I mean, you could set like, okay, I'm gonna have breakfast at this time or whatever, and that's enough. You've set those terms, but within that, you haven't said like, yeah, if you want to daydream, you can daydream, or if you haven't said what you want to do within that time. So you're still in a state of full focus if you're eating your toast and you check your phone or whatever just because you feel like it, because all you've said to yourself is I'm just going to make some toast and have breakfast, but you haven't set any other terms for that.
Yeah, I think that could be as an example of a strategy you can do without like straitjacketing yourself to something while also still being in focus. Because I mean, of course, there's some ambiguity. You don't want to be just feeling it out and just doing whatever. I mean, you could say like, hey, I haven't checked on this friend in a while. I'm curious. I want to see their post. So take a look at. I mean, you can realize that you have to leave some time to like become aware of things. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about my friend's birthday. I'll say happy birthday to him or her and during this time because like I'm in this relaxed state where I need to relax my mind for a bit. So I'm doing these simpler things. And even within that, you could be engaged with what you're doing. Like Like, are you using the jam you like on the toast? Like, did you buy a brand you didn't really care for much? Like, are you saving money for a better brand, or like, what kind of decisions do you have even on the little things? Like, are you engaged with the littler pleasures in life, and are you throwing those aside because you just in a haze about what you eat? Or I mean, I know that sounds little, but you could add some things to your life and add flair and flavor to it, literally and figuratively. Just being creative about what you can do, like being engaged in your life passionately. I mean, that's maybe another way to distinguish yourself maybe from somebody being passive. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of people who just grab a piece of toast, don't even think about it, and don't even acknowledge the flavors they're eating and just rush to work. I mean, that's not really engaged either. Sure, they're engaged to get to work and eating, but where's their mind at? Like, it's not on the food they're eating, probably not on their drive, and probably preoccupied by something that they're thinking that way, and not really. They're not at their full sense of flourishing, and you could probably see it in somebody, and they might be jealous of somebody who does take the time to smell the roses, so to speak, but also accomplish a lot. I mean, those are sort of things you can think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that in that example specifically, like I could see someone who's engaged but acts like that. Usually someone very driven. Yeah, you could be in a rush and not know why you're doing certain things, but you could also be super focused and excited about work. So food is just a fuel, and so you don't care.
Right,
It's just
right.
something to put in your mouth so you can get to work and do the thing you want to do at work. Um, it'd be interesting to look at because a lot of this sounds like mindfulness type meditation, which I've never got
Yeah,
into.
yeah.
But there's
That's
some
right. And
overlap.
that's more the sense of focus that I think you could even elaborate on from Rand. And I don't think it is diverges really from her.
Yeah,
I was introducing some, well, nothing contrary to objectivism, but things that probably haven't been talked about enough. But to bring it more back towards just the things Rand said, like about productivity, it's about being able to attain these things that matter. Or whatever strategies you might use, I mean, the point is to have like those virtues. Those virtues help you attain the things you need. Rationality is, I mean, regardless of what you think or however you attain that focus, you need to be able to focus to flourish in your life. You need to be able to focus on what do you need to sustain yourself? What psychological motivations do you need to sustain yourself? So the mindfulness strategies are more about an application of that. But the thing you're going for, the reasoning behind it is that you're attaining something for your life and is necessary by your nature. Like, as we were talking about last time, that need a reason for survival. The only way to reason is by focusing. I mean, that's basically being focused is the precondition to thinking, as you probably recall. And that's why it would be a virtue, because it's an absolute necessity to be able to, for your survival and existence. And without it, you would perish. And that's really the main idea of it.
yeah. Um, Yeah, I was just thinking, I could actually think of examples where I'm doing something and I'm like, I don't want to think about it right now. Like I'm doing it and some other thought comes up, I don't want to think about it right now. But if you don't have a specific time where like I will think about it later today, that could be an example of non-focus, I think.
Right.
Um, because I'm ignoring, if it's a state of conscious awareness and mental focus, then you're not ignoring things that come up. You're not pushing away. If you are pushing away, it would be the difference between, um, saying, acknowledging and then putting aside till a certain point, but not just a blanket, no, I'm just going to do this kind of thing. That I think that might be an example of not full focus or low level of focus.
I think a way to take that a little further is, yeah, there's the choice to focus and that underlies these things. But a lot of the principles of objectivist morality go a little more abstract. That's more the precondition. You may be focused, but we still don't know to what purpose are you putting that focus. I mean, the focus itself could be unfocused, if that makes sense. Like we were talking about sub goals and things like that. And that's what the virtues help you think about. That, well, for one, if you're not engaging in your virtues, you're probably not focused. And if you are focused, well, are you still engaging in those virtues in a way that you're applying these principles appropriately? It's not necessarily that there's only 3 virtues. It's more like she talks about primary virtues of ways of attaining those cardinal values is more how it is. And the ones she often talks about are productivity, honesty, justice, and pride. Are really, well, I'll just list them all that are usually most common. There's rationality, productivity, pride, honesty, justice. I mean, those basic ideas, but all of these relate to rationality. Like honesty as in, are you engaging with the facts of reality? Are you merely pushing them aside? Are you being just? Are you giving people what they deserve, or are you giving people what they don't deserve? Whether are you giving them something they have not earned, or whether you're giving them something, you're mistreating them. You want to treat them according to how they deserve. Or your productivity, are you like being industrious? Are you working towards these goals, and are you applying your mind to your productivity? And they don't have to be overwhelming, but those are the sort of things you can think about when you're trying to think about, am I acting well? Am I acting morally? Am I acting in my self-interest? These are really applications of your thinking and your rationality for your life, and the principles involved in reasoning about your life. But having those things in mind are how you can think about these things without really forgetting. They're easier to handle.
Yep. Be interesting to look at, going back to mindfulness, the overlap of that and focus. And in addition to mindfulness, I don't know if you've heard of time blocking, which Elon Musk does. Yes. Time blocking and what else? And then psychology as well, and just finding overlap and then integrating that with this idea of focus to then, work better, think better, and so on.
Yeah, it's in contrast to the mindfulness, because this is kind of like a focus for the purpose of performing better, thinking better, living better, rather than just being in a calm state. That's a deeper philosophical discussion, but as far as focus, it pretty much is the same thing. And I think it would be, even though Rand didn't talk about it too much, focus per se, I think it's very valuable to add that extra context given psychological understanding of today. And I mean, some of it is, Nathaniel Branden is relevant as far as psychology of self-esteem. It wasn't as much a thing before him. Like, he's not a big name in psychology, but he was relevant to thinking about self-esteem, and psychology of well-being is a very important topic these days. And they do consider these things like having a productive purpose and having your purpose. It's more like validation of the more narrower, or the value of approaching things in a self-focused, productive, focused way, and stemming from psychology revolving around self-esteem. And yeah, better way to put it.
Yep. Okay, we could probably go on to so this is in the same section. It was still on the virtual rationality. Consciousness of man is a machine without a spark plug. And then man has to discover how to use it and has to keep it in constant action.
Right.
Um, so this using, I think the metaphor is that when the using the spark plug is when you're in focus, but doesn't say what that focus looks like. It just means you're there and you're conscious and you're identifying things that come at you. But apart from that, it
Yes.
doesn't say anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
want to say anything else. But I think an interesting thing to point out about that is because it isn't much more than that, is not some extremely difficult thing that leads to a moral life and a morally focused life. Because if you really just turn on your brain, identify things and look at things, and you're pretty much good to go. It's everything else is just a matter of checking yourself, making sure you're doing the right thing, and the conceptual thought that's necessary to maintain that. It's just always, there isn't much more to it, and that's kind of why it's the philosophy of living life on earth. It's not trying to demand anything beyond the very nature of your existence. Like, I mean, that's what anyways is to survive, they think. And it's not people, it's almost hard to be rational, but it's really hard in the sense that it's deliberate. You're never accidentally flourishing. It's never an accident.
Yeah. So this is still rationality, which it was. So I guess she says one aspect of rationality is focus, but then she also says, this is in the essay, a commitment to the principle that all of one's convictions, values, goals, desires, and actions must be based on, derived from, chosen and validated by a process of thought, as precise and scrupulous a process of thought, directed by as ruthlessly strict an application of logic as one's fullest capacity permits. That was a bit of a mouthful, but I think, and this came up with a discussion with Stephen as well, which he gave some example of the paisley tie.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm reading that, it's like, to me, that seems impossible, meaning, yes, you can be aware of why certain things appeal to you, but some things just are seem so random. Like, why do I like this certain color? I'm not aware of. Does that mean if I get a red couch, which I don't have, as just an example, a green couch? I like green. So if I get a green couch, I don't necessarily know why or where that comes from. I haven't validated my taste for green by some scrupulous, strict application of logic. And so to me, it's like, yes, of course, it would be really cool to be able to just immediately introspect and know exactly why I value certain things. But a lot of them I don't. And it's not actually, to me, there's no obvious, direct, immediate, self-evident introspection I can do. I'm like, that's where my love of green has come from. So it's anyway, it just seems to strive for that seems impossible to me. Like, yes, self-awareness, introspection is good, but it's so difficult, and it's not just a self-evident thing. And some things just seem impossible to work out. So just any thoughts on that? Like
I
that whole,
know what you're saying. It's Rand is making a very strong claim there. Um, I think you're partly right to say that you seem to be acknowledging that she's making too strong a claim. I think it's easy to point out that she's probably making too strong of claims here, and I'm not sure they're really entirely consistent with the way she approaches um, rationality. I know what she's getting at. She's trying to say that you have to be always in focus and you got to be scrupulous about what you do. I think it's neglecting to mention what she thinks about hierarchy of values. That is not, that would certainly be the case with anything about your career, of things that have more immediate importance, have greater weight for your life. Sure, I mean, that, no question about it, but about weighing when to make the smaller choices, it could be a matter of what's an emotion or what's not itself, the feeling itself is not even immediately important. Like having a favorite color could just be a matter of what the sensitivity your eyes have to certain colors, and then you just get a pleasure from it. And really all you're doing about a couch really should just be what provides some pleasure. It doesn't really need to be any more than that. It doesn't, I don't follow that you necessarily failed to scrupulously measure and look at your values. It's just, there's only so much you could even need to consider. That's how I would want to respond to it. That her phrasing is probably too strong. And I don't think it quite, the strength of that phrasing doesn't quite fit in. I think it's on what we realized within her work. I mean, we're not trying to analyze whether every word she said is perfectly right. We're trying to analyze in the context of her thinking. So I don't think she's contradicting herself in the grand scheme of things, because she's talking about like, well, you got to make your choices. You got to consider about it. And don't. There's small things. You can decide quickly if your favorite color. Just because you do it fast doesn't mean you didn't do it.
Yeah,
and that goes with flavors too. Or just to mention one thing about flavors, that you could experience something and then choose to pursue it or not. Something could be pleasurable and you decide to pursue more of it. It doesn't need to be more than that. And sometimes there isn't anything more to say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think we can just invoke that principle of charitable interpretation. She did say, as one's fullest capacity permits, but yeah, it did strike me as like, well, it would be cool if you could do that. I'm not capable of, I've tried, I'm not capable of knowing the source of every single impulse or feeling.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think the best way to think of that is just in terms of the characters Rand wrote. I mean, regardless of what specific abstract, complicated words she wrote, all you need to do is think of one of her characters, because that's who she's trying to portray, a person who embodies these things. I mean, she wrote about, that's the only reason I bring up her writing lives, because it's so relevant to the sort of person she wants to describe and think about. So we can think about, say, Dagny, and I can't think of a good example with her, but maybe like maybe more like Dagny towards the end of the book, that like there's some easier decisions she made that didn't seem to stress her out and like she spent hours over it, but you can contrast that with how she agonized over whether to leave the Taggart Transcontinental. I mean, that would take a lot more thinking. It's not that somehow she didn't think about her love life, but she did think about her career. It's just that you think about them in different ways. And sometimes you need to think about one thing more than another. Doesn't mean you haven't thought if it, you haven't put in equal effort, but once things become, if you're acting consistently within your virtue, it actually shouldn't be very hard to analyze these things. That's kind of what Rand views this as, that if you live this virtuous life, you should be able to attain a life that's easy, but you're not agonizing over every little choice you make. You're not agonizing over, did you do the right thing? Am I sacrificing myself enough to make these people happy? And that's a lot of what she wants to portray it as. Are you doing the quote unquote hard things in order to attain this flourishing, happy, joyous life? And it might appear difficult on the outside, but when you see her character, you can see what she's envisioning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the key takeaway is an aim for being conscious of those things that you pick and pursue that are big and matter. So, for example, work and relationships. Attempt to think and reflect over those things. I think that's probably my main takeaway then from that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in this. There's probably heaps of examples on this, but like faking reality. So I get that because that's kind of like, it's faking reality. It's like so much broader than just telling a lie. So I'm thinking of other examples apart from just a lie. Faking reality. Um, can you think of any specific examples that are not like, because faking reality is broader. So what else would?
Um, a narcissist, like somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, because it's not just like something's wrong with their brain. It's that the way they think about themselves is almost distorted completely what anybody would think. They think they're better than reality would suggest. They think that others should pay more attention to them than they know they deserve. They know in their head that, well, they might have gotten so much practice at evading the actual thought, but that's the sort of person that the most extreme example I could think of is somebody like faking reality. The best I would say about that, if you're curious about that, just look people up, or in a way, or some of the bad guys in the struggling, in the sense that they um I lost my train of thought. Um what did you just say to get my train of
We
thought back?
we were going to, it's okay. So you were talking about narcissism as an example of faking
Right,
reality, and we're
right.
talking about it because it's broader than
Yeah,
just telling a lie.
yeah, narcissism. It because that's a way of thinking about yourself that make up for lack of self-esteem. That's a general view of that behavior. So they're faking their reality to make it feel to themselves that they have more. But if you look at their life, I mean, they could be rich, but they have other stresses and bad things in their life that you would wonder, are they actually even enjoying their life? Are they living, are they acknowledging reality, or are they trying to avoid every little flaw that they have? I think, as Sam mentioned before, I think the psychology of pleasure was getting into that. Like, it was basically describing a narcissist without, I think in the time it was written, it's not really how people used in the 60s. But now, like, you would think either somebody with severe depression could, in some sense, be evading reality. Not in all cases, because it could be that they don't want to acknowledge the hard things in their life and to fix them in some cases. Or it could be narcissism, or it could be um, even neuroticism about making the right choice because you're unable to think about the value of your own life, like you're avoiding the value of your life. And those are the sort of things. It's deeper than lying, of course, because you're trying to even see reality in a different way, not only deny it, but just act in a way that is as if you never saw it.
I can think of another going off those examples, which I have less knowledge of just because it's more specialized, like narcissism or depression. There's lots of different things involved in that. But I was thinking of one example. I don't know if this is it, but I remember when I was at Auschwitz and I was told a story about, I don't know if this was at Auschwitz or was one on one of the other, outside one of the other concentration camps.
Yeah,
Um, the there was a point where there were Nazi soldiers that would execute Jews, and the way they would do it at first. Oh, so this is the story of how they came up with the gas chambers. So at first they would just prepare a ditch and then just shoot them point blank into the ditch.
yeah,
But the soldiers would end up going crazy. Like they'd get alcoholic, they'd be committing suicide.
yeah.
Um, and so they needed a way to distance themselves from the act.
I
So
think
I'm,
that's a great example of faking reality in a way, because like, sorry, you go ahead.
yeah, because I'm wondering, like, you can put, like they got it down to such a science where even the Jews would fill in, I think they would pour pellets down the chimneys as well, so that the soldiers were completely removed. All they'd need to do is press a button or something like that. I can't remember. But I'm wondering if, I guess the only way to explain that is it helps distance you mentally and ignore what you're doing or put it away. Although there must be some level of knowledge that's what's being done, but I'm going to somehow keep distancing myself so I can function as a human.
Yeah, I think that is actually a common example within any examples of atrocity in war. That's a common thing that soldiers describe, that they're deliberately trying to put distance away from themselves from what happened, or they're even minimizing what they saw as a way to cope and just put it out of their mind as if it's not happening. And they might have good reason to do that in some cases, like they could be doing under threat of being murdered themselves. And that's one thing, or they could do it just out of just apathy, that they don't care. So in either way, you're kind of like, the hard thing is like, if you're faking it, you're just trying to avoid the truth of things. I mean, those are extreme examples, but I think they're very salient examples to think of when you're not in focus. You have to think in contrast to people who have in some way resisted, even within that context. Or say that some German generals who tried to assassinate Hitler, I mean, there are other issues with them besides that, but you can think in general that could try to, you don't have to evade. Evading can make sense. Because, I mean, some people just would rather be dead than live with it, as you heard about. And that's completely believable. So one way to avoid that is, of course, not get into that situation. It's not like, oh, like I feel bad for them, but at the same time, they're not completely blameless. They could have been looking the other way, like, oh, no, we're not going to have to kill any Jews, or they are, but I'm not going to have to do that. It could be even things like that they were thinking, or like, I'm not the one doing it. I was told to do it, but it's not me doing it. Like, I just was doing what I'm told, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we could. I'll just stop the recording so we can.
Yeah.